How's it going? This is Fox back again for Sound Design Tutorials, part 2 in our synthesis basics, covering the basics of synthesis, and for this purpose we are using Native Instruments Massive. There'll be a link in the description to part 1 where we went over the basic signal flow of a subtractive synthesizer. We also covered the wavetable oscillators, the oscillator section as a whole, the noise generator, feedback generator, and the filters. I felt like I sort of breezed through the filter section a bit. It deserves a lot more explaining on what the different filter types are if you are new to synthesis. I covered the routing in regards to that you can have them in series, which means that filter 1, the signal goes into filter 1 and then filter 2, then out. I spoke about parallel filtering, where an equal amount of signal comes from the oscillator section into both filters equally, so it's like splitting the sound. Parallel, two signal flows running alongside each other, and then you can mix the output of the two filters coming out the other end. I also explained that these knobs are the volume for each filter, and obviously this is the choice between series and parallel. Everything's modulatable in Massive, but we'll go over that at a later date. So yeah, I just wanted to go over the filter types really. Let me just get a sawtooth up here. So yeah, we're going to go through all these filters. A low pass 4. For this purpose, I'm going to show you what a low pass filter looks like in the auto filter within Ableton. This is this box at the bottom. A low pass filter does what it says. It lets all of the low signals pass at a certain cutoff point that you choose. When it's a low pass filter is fully open, it's going to let everything through. As you decrease the cutoff frequency, it's letting the lows pass at this frequency. So as you cut it down, it's cutting the highs out. You're either going to heard them describe it as a high cut or a low pass filter. I'll show you what effect this has in this dial here. I'll open the cutoff all the way out. You can see all the frequencies coming through. As I swoop the filter cutoff down, the low pass filter is going to cut the highs. You can see the effect it has. As you pull the cutoff frequency down, the frequency going from a high frequency to a lower frequency, it cuts the highs out. And the low pass 4 bit, which is this bit, is the steepness of the curve. A 4-pole is steeper than a 2-pole. The way I can explain that is by showing you here. This is all an EQ is a series of filters. That there is a 2-pole. That is a 4-pole, twice as steep. 4-pole, 2-pole, 4-pole. More of a drastic cut. It's not going to let anything out at a steeper curve. So yeah, that covers the two low pass filters, a low pass 4 and a low pass 2. A high pass 4 and a high pass 2 is exactly the same. I'll show you with the auto filter again. This is what a high pass filter looks like. It's exactly the same, but the cutoff frequency works opposite. When it's fully open, it's going to be negative. So it's letting everything through. And as you increase the cutoff, it's increasing the frequency that it's cutting the highs out. So it's high passing. High pass, high pass. I'll show you what effect this has. Turn the auto filter off. Letting everything through. As you dial it to the right, it moves the cutoff from the left to the right. Only letting the highs through. Same again, high pass 4 is a steeper slope than a high pass 2. An all pass, This is like two filters in one. It's a low pass, then a high pass. You can see it work both ways. I never really find much use for an all-pass filter, if I'm honest. You're generally going to be using a low pass or a high pass individually. A double notch does exactly what it says. It is going to be doing this in effect. And then the cutoff frequency links these two knobs together, which we can do quick. We group this. No, I can't be asked, it's too fiddly. But yeah, the cutoff frequency on a double notch filter, the resonance, this dial here, the resonance would be the height of the notch. The greater the resonance, the lower the cut. So the higher you push this resonance knob round, the lower the notch is going to come down. And the cutoff, it's going to keep both of these in tandem. I don't know the exact spacing. I can't imagine it being more than what we're looking at here. The cutoff frequency is going to sweep these two notches back and forwards across, creating a sort of phasing effect. Let's do away with these. If I increase the resonance, you can see the two notches there carving out the two grooves. If I increase the resonance, they get steeper. You can see the two troughs. One of them's here, one of them's here. As I increase the resonance, I get more profound, but it also boosts the frequencies outside that. Filters tend to do that. As it's cutting one sort of frequency, it like boosts the frequencies slightly just outside the notches. So that's a double notch. That's useful for if you modulate out with an LFO or something to give you like a phasing effect. A bandpass filter is exactly what it says. It lets a certain band of frequencies through. Again, it's easier to show you on the auto filter. This is what a bandpass looks like. It's cutting everything outside of this little triangle. You're only going to hear the stuff inside this triangle. So as the bandpass hovers over the high frequencies, you're only going to hear the high frequencies. As you loop it low, it's going to cut the highs as it lets in the lows. I'll show you that with the bandpass inside massive. Easier to see it when there's more resonance, and the bandwidth, it opens up the sides of the triangle in effect to give it a greater amount of frequencies going through. That's this dial in the middle. Thin bandwidth, it's a real small triangle. Again, useful to modulate, you get some neat effects. So that's bandpass done. Band reject is exactly the same as what I explained to you with a double notch, but it's just one band, one notch. Again, we can show you what it looks like in an auto filter. Looks like this. It's just carving out one portion. Anything outside of the line, above it, you're not going to hear. So again, gives a phasing effect as you sweep it because it's cutting a certain frequency out. I'll turn it off and show you inside massive what it sounds like. Same again, the bandwidth, increase the width of the band that is being rejected. You can see it sweeping through. Again, cool for modulating, get some phasing sort of sounds. Right, this is where we get interesting. The Scream and the Daft are both low pass filters, just with varying amounts of feedback and stuff like that. I think the Scream filter is a low pass filter, but I think it feeds it back into itself. Adds a nice resonant sound, resonant feeling to sounds if you use a Scream filter. I often use that on basses, really, something a lot lower. Used a lot by Skrillex and that to make them classic clunker sort of sounds. You'd modulate that cut off with an envelope to get them sort of effects that they use in dubstep. And the Daft filter is the same sort of thing. It's a low pass filter with other sort of feedback options. So the cutoff is just acting as a low pass filter. The other knobs, like in the scream and the resonance, are just changing sort of the tone of the feedback. Comb filter, this is a bit more difficult to explain. You can see it sweeping through. The pitch is controlling the cutoff frequency of a comb-shaped filter. If I open Serum quickly, just to show you what a comb filter looks like. Serum's a really neat tool because all the filters have a visual display. So that's what a comb filter looks like. If you look at it as if like we have been all the other filters inside Auto Filter, it looks like a comb. It's loads of peaks and troughs and notches and stuff. Modulated, you get some crazy effects. Good to put 2 comb filters on 2 filters with Inside Massive. This is something I do quite regularly. I put 1 comb filter on 1 filter, 1 comb filter on another, and modulate the pitches opposite each other ever so slightly. It gives crazy sort of distorted phasing effect. Real nice if you do the modulation slowly for like making some pads sound thicker and wider. A real good trick. Acid filter is a low pass filter just with a real high resonant peak. I don't know which filter it's based on, whether it's from the TB303 or it's a bit Moog-esque when you crank the resonance. Get them classic sort of acid bass sounds. It's just a low pass filter. Again, the cutoff knob is doing the same thing. It's cutting off frequencies from high to low, letting the low frequencies through. So when it's all the way shut, you're not going to hear nothing. As you open it up, it lets the lows through. So yeah, I hope that has helped you understand filters a little bit better. I'm probably telling people stuff they don't need to know, but this is Synthesis Basics, so I felt like we needed to go over the filter types in a little bit more detail. How you mix and match these filters is really pure to taste. I often do a low pass filter and then something like a Scream or a Daft on the second filter and have the signal flowing from one into the other. Gives a nice effect, blending them together with this mix knob to however you see fit. So yeah, that is the filter section in a bit more detail, the different filter types. We went over the noise generator, feedback, modulation oscillator, and oscillator 1, 2, 3 in part 1. We're going to go over the insert effects now. These are exactly what it says on the tin. They are effects you can insert at various different points along the signal chain. You can choose between any of these sections here, wherever you see it. Ints 1 is insert 1. Ints 2 is insert 2. Makes sense, real straightforward. You can tell it exactly where you want it to be. This option here, you can have insert 1 coming after the oscillator section. You can have insert 1 coming after the oscillators and then the noise section. Going into filter 2, you can have insert 1 or 2 coming after filter 1 or after filter 2 or between the filters when you have it in parallel mode. This is a real neat trick. Some of these are distortion, parabolic shaper, sine shaper and hard clipper are forms of distortion. And you bang them in the middle of 2 filters when you've got them running parallel. Crank the drive up, you can get some real gnarly distorted effects. Good for heavier bass sort of types of music like electro, dubstep, drum and bass. You are going to be using these insert effects in this position inside the filter, in between the filters should I say, rather than just coming out after one or the other. You can also have the insert effect after both filters, so you can choose to have it after one filter and then it gets mixed with a filter that hasn't got it, either way round, or you can have it to come, imagine it just here after the filters have been mixed together, then you can use these insert effects. So yeah, the routing page, this sometimes scares people, it can be a little bit daunting. Let's zoom in a little bit. Yeah, like I said, this can sometimes boggle people's heads, but it's real straightforward. It's just clickable destinations for all these things. You can choose where you want the insert effects and where you want the feedback. And that's it, that's all it is. You can also have insert 1 here. And what this does, it takes the signal after the filter, mixes it with the insert effect, puts it back in after the oscillators again. It's just a way of gritting the sound up once you've made a patch, pretty much. If you put it here, it's like saying, oh, I've made my patch, I want it to go right at the end. If you are using the feedback, you can bring it back in and sort of drive it into itself. A real good place. Again, you're going to get used to these. It take you 2 or 3 months of using Massive to work out where you're going to use these insert effects. Just trial and error really. Different ones are going to be suited at different places and different times for different sort of patches. So we'll go through the insert effects now. So we're going to have insert 1 after oscillator 1 because that's the only one we're using at the minute. We'll close all the filters off. All we've got is a pure saw wave. So we have simple delay. We need to turn this on. Does exactly what it said. It's delaying the signal. It's not like a delay you would imagine as an after effect. You don't have a lot of control over the time either really. It's quite subtle. If you crank the dry wet up too high, you're only going to hear the delayed signal and you're not going to hear the first one. That's how I use it, almost like a fade in. If you have the dry wet pretty much centre, you're going to hear both signals. You can hear the slight ping of it afterwards. You can modulate that. A neat trick is to modulate the time with an envelope. We'll go for all the modulatings later on. If you have the attack time quite fast. Yep, we're modulating the time that the delay is affecting. Neat little trick, probably getting to get ahead of myself there. But yeah, that is a simple delay, real straightforward. Delay is one of the easier effects to understand. It takes a signal and then replays it again at varying volumes and varying times. You don't have any ping pong effects, there's no feedback, so it's just once. So it's taking the signal and then playing it back again. You can hear it bing. The longer the time, the longer the time knob to the right, the greater the distance between the initial time that you hear the sound and the played back sound. Simple delay, real straightforward. Sample and hold. Not too sure what this does, if I'm honest. Let me get the manual up quick. I was just checking over these before we got here. Sample and hold. Classic sample and hold effect. It samples the incoming audio signal at a given interval. And you can see that. Let's see, man. This is a classic sample and hold effect. It samples the incoming audio signal at a given time interval, and this sample is held until the next sample is taken. The result is stepped, temporarily quantized audio. The dry wet control is just the balance between the unprocessed dry signal and the delayed wet signal right. Pitch controls the time interval frequency at which the signal is sampled, more slow to the left, more quick to the right. So clear as mud. It's just sampling parts of the frequency and bouncing it back and forward. Further to the right, the faster. Like I say, it's when it says quantizing effect, it's almost like a bit rate reducer. It's a nice chorusy sort of sound if you get a rate faster. Useful on basses, I would imagine. Bit crusher. This is like a rate reducer. Let's see what the manual says about this as well. I always thought it was a rate reducer. The bit crusher is a digital effect that creates distortion in your signal by reducing the bit depth of the signal. That's what I thought. It reduces the quality of the signal. Most of the WAV files that you get from sample packs are 24-bit, 44, 100 hertz, which is like sort of CD quality. Bit crusher is reducing that quality. It gives it more like a Game Boy sort of 8-bit sound effect. Crush control adjusts the amount of bit depth reduction from no reduction at all when turned to the left to a maximum reduction distortion when turned to the right. You can use this effect to create digital degradation, sounds such as are typical with early digital samplers, to add a slight bit of noise to your sound when only subtle crush control values. So yeah, that's what we thought. It's decreasing the bit rate further to the right. If I turn it to the left, it's going to bring it back into modern day. Real straightforward, a bit crusher. Frequency shifter. Does exactly what it says. Change the frequency, which is the pitch. That's why it's got a pitch knob. Dry wet is the amount that you're going to hear. Real low pitch, real low pitch or low frequency, you're actually gonna hear it working. You can see it bouncing. higher the pitch, the higher the frequency, the higher it's going to sound. You can actually see it shifting the fundamental over to the right. If we watch it in this, turn the pitch down. This is the fundamental of the sound. This is the key note. It says A2, which is exactly what I'm playing on my keyboard. If I move the pitch knob round to the right, you're going to see it swing the fundamental over, increasing the frequency, increasing the pitch. Actually, the fundamental stands out. It's all the other harmonics it's shifting. How very clever. Again, another one that I don't really use. I use frequency shifter inside the Virus. It's a bit more advanced. There's more control. Yeah, nice effect. Modulating it. Again, inside the filters gives a neat trick. Modulating it with an envelope. Again, we're going to go over envelopes later on. Frequency shift, high pass, low pass filter. Exactly what it says. You've got a high pass and a low pass filter. 2 knobs, the cut off for each. Exactly how I explained it earlier on. You can see the low pass filter letting the lows through, cutting the highs, and the high pass doing the same. It's like an extra set of filters that you can use after the filter section, or before the filter section, or in between the filter section, wherever you choose. So you could choose to have a low pass filter after the 2 filters. If you wanted to use a comb filter and an acid filter, and then you wanted another filter, chuck this in, use it exactly how you want. What else have we got in here? We have a sine shaper. Right, this is where it gets exciting. Not very exciting, but it is a form of distortion. It runs the audio signal through a wave shaper, creating a sine wave shape. This is this varies what it's going to do depending on the signal and the waveform that you're using, but it's just a form of distortion. If I turn it off, increase a bit of drive. Makes it sound like a sine wave halfway through. Parabolic shaper, exactly the same thing. It puts the signal through a wave shaper, but parabolic shaper, the shape, it's more like an S than a sine wave that way. The distortion curve is like a sidewards S. It's a bit more harsher than a sine shaper. Hard clipper is another form of distortion as well. Sort of squarifies the sound. That has made a saw wave sound like a square wave. Okay, that's the insert effects, real straightforward. I'll go over the main effects as well while we're here. Sod it, we might as well. So yeah, that's the insert effects talked about. I'll use this routing page to show you where the master effects come. They come here. After the oscillators, after the filters, after any sort of insert effect or feedback that you want. After the amp and pan modulation, right before it goes to the main out, you get the effects section. And we have loads to choose from. You have a standard reverb. Sometimes called an echo in other synths. A reverb is exactly what it sounds. It's emulating the sound reverbing off of a wall, or as if you're inside a form of structure. Dry wet is the amount of reverb compared to the incoming signal when it's totally dry. Just the dry signal when it's totally wet. All you're hearing is the reverbed sound coming back off the wall at you. The size is the size of the room. The bigger the room, the larger the reverb, the longer the tail. Really nice reverb actually for such basic controls. The density is like a dampening amount. Although it doesn't have much effect. The colour is where it's aiming the reverb. Further to the right, the brighter the reverb's going to be. It's almost like putting a filter after the reverb, sort of telling you what frequencies you let through. When it's to the left, it's going to let more of the lows through. When it's to the right, you're going to hear it let more of the higher frequencies through. Yeah, reverb, love it. We've got a small reverb, exactly the same controls, but everything is toned down a bit. The room size is a lot smaller. Density and the colour knobs have the same effect. It's pretty much just the room size. For a more subtle reverb effect, Flanger. You can actually see what this is doing. We'll bring up Serum again quick, which I've deleted, that's handy. Just to show you what a flanger looks like. Flanges. A flange is like a comb filter, but it has less notches towards the lower frequencies. It's more boosting and troughing, sort of mids to highs, and so that's the shape of the filter. And then these controls are what control the sound of it sweeping. The rate is the speed of which it moves left and right. You can see it pulsing faster when it's to the right. Slow it down, you can see it moving left and right, those peaks and troughs. Feedback, it's feeding the signal, the filtered signal back into itself. Creates sort of a more resonant sound, and the depth is the depth of the peaks and the troughs, so the more pronounced the sound is going to be. No, it's not. The depth is how far the modulation moves back and forwards. You can see it again. With a small depth, it's only affecting the high frequencies. With a bigger depth, the modulation is covering more of the spectrum. So that is a flanger positive. Flanger mono. If I'm honest, I don't know the difference between a flanger positive and a flanger mono. They both sound the same to me. There must be a difference. A flanger negative. Flanger positive, I would imagine, is creating peaks. Flanger negative is creating troughs. You can see it cutting frequencies rather than boosting them like the flanger positive did. Same thing with the controls. The rate is the speed, the depth is how far it's going to come down the spectrum. Negative mono, whether it only goes one way rather than pulsing back and forwards again, I'm not sure. Chorus. Okay, what a chorus does, it creates a duplicate exact copy of the audio signal that you've got, and then it delays it ever so slightly. So it's like having two audio signals playing slightly different times from each other, which gives us that thicker sound. And then these other knobs are the modulation for that delay. You can move the signals closer or further apart together with this offset. The depth is how far the movement covers, and the rate is how fast the movement is. So it's picture two audio signals running side by side. When they're in tandem, it's a nice constant, just a thicker sound because one's slower than the other. When you apply the modulation with the rate and the offset, they're sort of jockeying backwards and forwards, which gives it a bit more movement, a bit more sort of emotion. If I turn the rate, offset and depth down, I'll give it some rate. You can see it sweeping back and forwards. Offset is the distance between the two sounds, so it's going to appear brighter. Depth of the modulation is the depth of the LFO, sort of moving the rate backwards and forwards. It's a lot to take in a chorus, real straightforward when you get used to it. You're mainly going to be using a chorus on a pad or a soundscape or something like that. Sometimes use it to thicken the lead up, but you have to be careful. It can really muddy the signal up. Chorus ensemble. Chorus mono must just be one. I don't know what all these mono are. I'll have a look in the manual what these mono ones are, and I'll write it in the description at the end. Chorus ensemble. This is the one I use. It's not just a one or two delayed signals, it's 3 or 4. So it's like, I ain't too sure how many it is, I could only guess. Normal delays are only one, normal choruses are only normally 2, you have 2 delayed signals. The original signal and then 2 separate signals. Chorus ensemble I would say is 5 or 6, all delayed slightly from each other to give us that real thick sort of stereo sound. So really, really good for pads, choruses are. Phaser, we went over. Did we go over the phaser? Again, we can show you what a phaser looks like inside Serum. Just quickly. Flanges, phaser, drive, resonance, high pass, low frequency, cut off. Phaser is 3 notches and 3 peaks. Usually, sometimes you get 4, depending on the filter type. But the what controls have we got on here? Phaser, dry wet rate, feedback and depth. Yeah, the depth is going to be like the resonance. So when you move the depth knob, it's going to be like that. It's how high the peaks are going to go and how low the troughs are going to go. The rate is the speed at which those peaks and troughs are sweeping through, giving you sort of the phasing effect. And the feedback, again, it takes the signal out the end of the effect, pumps it back in it to itself, which gives it sort of a real resonant sort of bite. I generally use a phaser with a slow rate. Again, useful for pads, gives it a nice shimmer, slowly modulating the cut up the peaks and troughs backwards and forwards, creating gaps in the audio signal and also boosting things in the audio signal. Gives us that phasing effect. Phaser mono. Again, I'll check that out. Delay. This is a more classical sort of delay, this is. It's not working because... because I had the damping down. Damping is like a filter, filtering out which part of the delays you want to let through. All the way around to the right, it's going to let all of the delayed signal through. What it does, it creates a duplicate of the audio signal and plays it back at a certain time. Only plays one instance of it back again. Delay synced. This is the one you're going to be using generally. It syncs the delay time, the time it takes for the delay signal to come back and you hear it. It syncs it to the master clock or the clock of your DAW. And mine's set at 139 BPM per minute. These are all intervals of that. At the minute, they're both set to a quarter note. Damping again, filters them out. Feedback puts the signal back into itself and keeps it looping over. If you have the feedback on full, it should go forever. It doesn't. Inside some synths, if you have the feedback on full, it'll just keep looping it back into itself over and over and over. Standard delay for trance sort of plucks, 1/8, 1/4. A little less feedback. The feedback knobs makes you want to use this delay synced rather than the other one. Control the amount of frequency that carries it plays on. It's like the decay, the amount of time that the delay carries on until you stop hearing the delayed effect. That is a delay synced dimension expander. I think, again, I'm not too sure. I always took it for granted this was just like an extra voice of unison, just to help thicken the sound up. I always use it just to help make anything sound a little wider. The size, the bigger the effect it has, and the dry wet is the amount that you're going to hear it. Dimension expander. Classic tube. This is a form of distortion. It emulates running it through a classic tube, sort of warming the signal up on an old analog synth. You can really hear it giving it that warm sort of glow. Teletube is another form of distortion. This one's a little bit more severe. If you play any form of chord, you're really going to get some gnarly effects with a dry, wet and drive on full. Browner tube is another one, an emulated tube from a different synth. So yeah, that's all your basic effects. 3 types of distortion, a dimension expander, which is almost like adding more voices, 2 delays, 2 phasers, 3 choruses, 4 flangers and 2 reverbs. And of course you have 2 effect sends. Effects 1 does go into effect 2. Yep, they are in serial. So whichever effect you have in effect 1, if you click on effect 2, all of that is then going to be affected by effect 2. So if we put a delay synced, put a delay on effects 1 with that classic delay that we had. If we then put a reverb, everything before is now going to be affected by the reverb, even the delayed pings. Always use delay and reverb together, I do, even if it's a tiny little subtle amount. So yeah, that's the effects. The only other bit you've got is a total separate bit of the EChem for an EQ. This is your bog standard EQ. You've got a low shelf. You can boost the low shelf or cut the low shelf. What a low shelf is this. It creates a shelf over the lows. You can boost it or you can reduce it. If you boost it to the right, it's going to increase the sound of the low frequencies. If you keep the boost low, it's going to decrease the low shelf. And this is the cutoff frequency. The low shelf is the cutoff frequency to where it boosts it. It's exactly the same with the highs, but going the other way. Again, we'll show you. Boosting the low shelf, boosting the lows, boosting the highs, cutting the highs, cutting the lows. If you do too much of something when you're doing all your modulation and stuff inside Massive, sometimes you're going to need to do a little EQing at the end. I generally use it I do my EQing outside of Massive, inside a DAW. EQ8 inside Ableton is awesome. You got a lot more control. I generally just use this EQ to sort of boost certain frequencies that I want boosting. But yeah, for now that is it. All the basic effects, insert and master effects. I hope I explained them simply enough, but not too simple. Well, saying that, if you're watching this, it is a Synthesis Basics, so you're going to want to know what all the different effects are. As for what you're going to use them for, again, you're going to, when you start making your own patches, get used to playing around with the effects, and you'll soon work out which ones are best suited to which sort of sounds. But yeah, that's it for now. That's pretty much the basic front panel which you see without clicking on any of these other sections. And we'll go through these one by one next time. I think to start with, I'll cover the oscillator section and the voicing section, because these are related to the oscillators. But yeah, for now that's it. Part 2 done. Insert effects and master effects. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe. Part 3 coming up soon. I say I'm going to be going over these clickable tabs before we then go into the modulation section, which is all the envelopes, LFOs, performers and steppers. That's when we're going to have some fun. We're going to start building patches. I'm going to show you how we can use all these different envelopes to modulate different things, talk about the sidechain functions, key tracking, velocity, yeah, internal envelopes. We're going to cover everything. Massive is a bit more in depth than most synthesizers, I should say this. That's mainly the reason I chose it. If you can learn Massive, you can pretty much, you'll be able to use any synth. That's what I taught myself on, and it's put me in good stead to learn any synth from here on out. So yeah, Synthesis Basics, but Massive is not basic, so we'll try and cover it best we can. As I say, if you want private lessons on any synth, then get in touch. There'll be a link in the description. Check me out on Facebook and Google Plus if you want to get in on any live streams where I'm